The 1970s in Britain weren't just strikes and disco, they were also a decade of daring heists. From bank vaults tunneled into at night to security vans robbed in daylight, criminals pushed boundaries. Some of these robberies became legends, with their stories still retold decades later. Subscribe, and let's uncover 10 of the biggest robberies that shook Britain in the 1970s. The decade began with a shock when thieves struck at a Barclays branch in London in 1970. Instead of a smash and grab, the gang spent weeks planning, digging their way underground into the vault itself. When staff opened the bank the next morning, they found the safe ransacked and cash and valuables worth over £200,000 missing, millions in today's money. It was a heist that showed Britain was entering a new era of organized, calculated crime. The boldness of the robbery stunned both the public and the police. Barclays, one of the most respected banking names, had been breached in the most humiliating way possible. Despite extensive investigations, much of the loot was never recovered, and some of the culprits faded back into the shadows. The Barclays vault raid set the tone for the 1970s. Britain's criminals were getting smarter, braver, and far more ambitious. And it was only the beginning of a decade filled with heists that would shock the nation. In September 1971, Britain witnessed one of its most audacious robberies. A gang rented a shop 2 doors down from Lloyd's Bank on Baker Street and spent weeks digging a tunnel directly into the vault. Using walkie-talkies to stay in contact, they bypassed alarms and security, finally breaking through the concrete floor and helping themselves to cash, jewellery, and valuables worth around £3 million, more than £40 million in today's money. The scale of the heist shocked the nation. Newspapers dubbed it the walkie-talkie robbery, and rumours spread that compromising photographs of a royal had been among the stolen goods, fueling endless speculation. Despite arrests, much of the loot was never recovered, and the Baker Street raid entered British crime folklore. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a symbol of how organized, daring, and imaginative criminals of the 1970s had become. While the robbery itself happened in California, its masterminds had deep ties to Britain. In March 1971, a group led by Mickey Spillane and other experienced criminals, some with roots in the UK's underworld, broke into the United California Bank in Laguna Niguel. They blasted their way into the vault, escaping with an estimated $30 million in cash and valuables, the largest bank heist in American history at that time. What made the story gripping for a British audience was the connection back home. Several of the suspects were part of transatlantic criminal networks, showing how far British gangs were reaching by the early 1970s. For investigators, it was proof that organized crime had become global, with London's hardened criminals exporting their skills abroad. The heist became legendary not just for its size, but for its sheer ambition, a robbery that linked Britain's criminal underworld to one of America's biggest bank jobs. As Britain moved into the 1970s, security vans carrying wages and cash became prime targets. One of the most daring early examples came when armed robbers ambushed a Security Express van, holding the guards at gunpoint before escaping with hundreds of thousands of pounds. These vans were supposed to symbolize safety and order, yet time and again, gangs proved how vulnerable they really were. For workers expecting their weekly pay packets, News of these robberies was unsettling. Wages stolen before they could even be handed out. The attacks often left drivers and guards traumatized, forced to choose between risking their lives or handing over the money. The rise of van heists in the early 1970s showed how organized crime was evolving, faster, bolder, and willing to strike in broad daylight. They set the stage for even bigger raids later in the decade, making Security Express a name forever tied to Britain's heist history. In March 1972, Glasgow was shaken by one of the city's boldest payroll robberies. A gang of armed men intercepted a British rail van carrying wages for railway staff, escaping with nearly £300,000, a fortune at the time. The attack was quick and brutal, carried out in broad daylight on a busy street, leaving guards terrified and powerless. For a city already known for razor gangs and organized crime, this heist cemented Glasgow's reputation as one of Britain's most dangerous places in the 1970s. The robbery not only embarrassed the authorities, but also highlighted how vulnerable wage deliveries had become. Much of the money was never recovered, and several of the culprits melted back into the city's underworld. The British rail payroll robbery became a defining moment in Scotland's criminal folklore, a reminder that in the 1970s, even the wages of working men weren't safe. In November 1974, one of the most audacious crimes of the decade unfolded at Heathrow Airport. Armed robbers targeted a warehouse where nearly £1 million in gold bullion was being stored before transport. With military-style precision, the gang overpowered guards and disappeared with the bullion, a staggering sum at the time, equivalent to tens of millions today. The heist exposed serious flaws in airport security, shaking public confidence and embarrassing officials. The aftermath was chaotic. Police launched one of the largest investigations of the decade, chasing leads across London and beyond. Some suspects were arrested, but much of the gold was never recovered, fueling speculation that it had quickly been melted down and smuggled overseas. The Heathrow bullion raid stood as a landmark crime, proving that Britain's criminals of the 1970s were capable of striking at the very heart of national infrastructure. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a statement of ambition and ruthlessness. Long before the infamous 1980s raid, Knightsbridge and nearby Mayfair were already hotspots for daring jewellery heists. In the mid-1970s, one such robbery saw a gang storm a prestigious jeweller, escaping with diamonds and gems worth well over £1 million, an eye-watering sum for the time. The criminals struck with precision, overwhelming staff in minutes and vanishing into London's maze of streets before police could react. For the wealthy clientele of Knightsbridge, the robbery was a wake-up call. If even the most exclusive jewelers in London could be breached, nowhere felt safe. The press relished the story, splashing headlines about masked men and glittering loot, while police scrambled to restore confidence. Many of the jewels were never seen again, believed to have been quickly broken down and sold through international channels. This precursor heist foreshadowed the even more infamous jobs of the 1980s, showing that London's luxury districts had become prime hunting grounds for ambitious gangs. In 1975, Glasgow once again earned its reputation as a city living in the shadow of organized crime. Armed raiders stormed a branch of the Clydesdale bank, terrifying staff and customers before making off with what was then one of Scotland's largest cash hauls. Witnesses recalled the gang's chilling efficiency, faces masked, weapons drawn, orders barked with military precision. Within minutes, the robbers had vanished, leaving behind panic, shattered glass, and a shaken city. The robbery highlighted both the growing professionalism of Scotland's criminal underworld and the challenges faced by police. Despite a wide investigation, much of the money was never recovered, and rumors spread that powerful Glasgow gangs had orchestrated the job. For locals, it became another chapter in the city's long history of violent crime, proof that even banks in the heart of town were no longer untouchable. The Clydesdale bank heist remains one of the most infamous robberies in Scotland's history, still whispered about in pubs and back streets decades later. By the mid-1970s, security vans had become prime targets for Britain's increasingly organised gangs, and the Sheppard's bush raid showed just how far they were willing to go. In 1976, armed robbers ambushed a van in broad daylight, cornering it on a busy London street. With guns drawn, they forced the guards to surrender before fleeing with hundreds of thousands of pounds in cash. For ordinary Londoners, the sight of heavily armed criminals striking so openly was terrifying, a stark reminder that the streets were no longer safe. The robbery marked a turning point in the decade's crime wave. Unlike earlier, quieter heists, this was bold, violent, and designed to send a message. It exposed the vulnerability of wage deliveries and embarrassed the security firms meant to protect them. Police launched a major investigation, but much of the money was never recovered, and some of the culprits vanished back into London's underworld. The Sheppard's bush raid stood as a symbol of the 1970s, a decade where Britain's criminals grew bolder, guns became more common, and heists turned into spectacles of fear. In 1978, Britain's criminal underworld revealed its international reach with a daring warehouse raid linked to Lufthansa cargo. Though often remembered as part of a wider European crime wave, London gangs played a critical role in organising and moving the stolen goods. The job targeted high-value shipments, cash, jewellery, and foreign currency, vanishing from Heathrow storage facilities in one of the decade's most audacious strikes. Losses were counted in the millions, and once again much of the loot was never recovered. What made this heist so remarkable was its sophistication. Rather than smashing their way in, the criminals relied on inside information, carefully timed movements, and international contacts to sell the goods abroad. It showed that by the late 1970s, British criminals were no longer operating only in pubs and back streets. They were building networks that stretched across Europe and beyond. For police, the Lufthansa raid was a sobering reminder. Britain's gangs had gone global, and their ambition was only getting bigger.